Well, good morning. If I could be completely transparent, this sermon kicked my tail. As a pastor, there are times where you prepare things and God simply just says to you, you know this. You know this. I've done this in your life. You see it. And then there are times where he says, you don't know this and you need to. And today's one of those. So bear with me. We are in week 4 of our series called 10. And it's not 10 weeks for those of you who are joining us for the first time. It's a series we're calling 10 because we're simply talking about the 10 Commandments. And my hope was, and my prayer as we started this series was that you would begin to see things about the 10 Commandments that maybe you've never seen before. That you'd begin to think about them a little bit differently. That you would begin to explore what place they may even have in your life based on what we're preaching, and maybe even understand a little bit more about who God is. And honestly, what we started with, and what I believe is the most vital piece of information, is that when it comes to God, rules only come after relationship. The 10 Commandments were not God's first step. The first step God made was to save his people. The first step God made was a relationship with the people. And then he tried to help them understand what it means to be his. And we even talked about, I think in the first week, about when you purchase a puppy and you bring him home. When did that puppy become yours? Did it become yours when you placed him in the fence to keep him safe? Or was he yours when you purchased him? See, God creates a fence for us because we're his, not because the fence makes us his. Does that make sense? And that's a little jumbled there, but that's the truth. The truth is God puts us in the fence because we belong to him, and that fence includes a way to live. And for the Israelite people, they needed that. They needed to understand a way to live because for 400 years, they had been slaves. They did not choose when they went to bed. They did not choose when they woke up. They did not choose who to talk to that day or what they would work on or what chore they would do around the house. They belonged to someone else. They were property. And because of that, as God freed them, they had absolutely no idea how to be his. Because for 400 years, they had belonged to the Egyptians in their mind. They were enslaved. And God wanted them to be free. And he knew in order for them to understand how to be free, they had to stop figuring out how to be a good slave and start being able to figure out how to be a good follower of Jesus. So week 1 was the first commandment. And what we said was, because it's in Exodus chapter 20, we said, you shall have no other gods before me. And what God was trying to communicate to the people is he was asking them, who do you worship? And what he was saying is if you're going to be my people and I'm going to be your God, I'm not sharing. You belong to me. Who do you worship? And then the second commandment said, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. Don't you dare try to shrink me into something that's manageable. Don't create an idol of me. You follow me, and I'm bigger than your understanding. And don't you dare try to make me small. And it was no longer about who do we worship. It was about how do we worship. Do we worship a God that we understand because we only like certain pieces of him and we make pretty much an idol? Or do we worship a God that maybe we only have to worship one day a week? Or do we worship a God that is bigger than our understanding, and we submit our lives to him knowing that we'll never fully grasp the greatness of God? That's the kind of God I've said yes to. A God that I don't understand. A God that does things that don't make sense to me sometimes. A God who's unpredictable. But I try over and over again to shrink him down into something that I understand. And he says, That's not who I'm asking you to worship. I'm asking you to worship all of me. So the second question was, how do you worship? The third question, or the third commandment was, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Pastor Tyler, thank you for last week. It was great. And Tyler was put on the spot pretty late because it's crazy. This COVID stuff's crazy. So when I called Tyler and say, I got COVID, he jumped in real fast. And I believe that the Lord spoke through you last Sunday. Significant. I know he spoke to me through you. So thank you. But what Tyler explained to us was that it's not necessarily about cussing, or it's not just about, when we typically think of using the Lord's name in vain, there are specific words that seem to fly out when we think about that. It's not about that. It's about attaching things to God that are not his. It's about thanking him for things that he didn't do. So he starts with, who do you worship? And then it moves to how you worship. And then last week we talked about, do you know who I am? Do you know who God is? It makes me fall out of my chair if I ever flip the channels and see one of those award shows, and this guy gets an award for a song that degrades women, and then he gets up and the first person he thanks, I want to thank God for giving me the gift to share with you about how women are awful. Do not attach God's name to things that do not belong to him. He's not a fan, okay? He's not a fan of that at all. In fact, what it says here is he's not just not a fan. The Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses my name. If it's not of him, don't attach him to it. So we move from who do you worship to how do you worship to the Lord saying, do you even know who I am? And then we hit the fourth commandment today. And the fourth commandment says this: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Okay, so let me make sure I get this straight. Who you worship matters. How you worship matters. Making sure you know who God is matters. And then don't work. Isn't that kind of weird? Like, how do we go from, this is who I am, and I want you to know who I am, because God's voice echoes. How do we go from that? How do we go from that to rest? Because the word Sabbath means rest. It's what it means. Not like a fancy rest. Not like some weird Greek interpretation of rest that we don't understand in English. No, it means rest. Like legitimately rest. And what he says is keep the Sabbath day holy, which means holy meaning set apart. So rest like you don't rest any other day. Your holiness should be different. That's why it's called holiness. We're set apart as people. The Sabbath day is different. Keep the Sabbath. Rest well. Don't work. This is really significant to God in a way that I have trouble understanding in my humanness. Why on earth would our God go from who we worship and do we know him to let's not work? He goes on to say this as a part of that commandment. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, not even your animals, or any foreigner who may come in. So just so we're clear, there is no roundabout way to actually get work done. Don't work. There's a part of me that's like, okay, God, do you really have to be that specific? But then I remembered that I raised a 3-year-old Jackson. See, 3-year-old Jackson was special. 3-year-old Jackson went to daycare and took 2 little Hot Wheels cars and started smashing them together as hard as he could. And the teacher walked over and said, "Jackson, stop smashing cars." And he looked at her sincerely and said, "Okay." She looked over 5 minutes later, and here he is, doing it again. "Jackson, I told you to stop smashing cars." "I know, that's why I grabbed the trucks." This is a true story. "Fine, Jackson. Don't smash anything with wheels." She looks over 5 minutes later. "Jackson, I've asked you to stop twice." 3-year-old Jackson, to let you know my son's intelligence at the age of 3, says, "That's why I grab tanks and they run on belts." And she said, "Don't smash anything." And he was like, "Oh, okay." See, it's a funny story about a 3-year-old, but this is actually how we work as humans. Every time people give us rules, we try to figure out the way around it, don't we? Especially when it's a rule we don't want to keep, right? We try to figure out the workaround. Well, okay, I can't work, but you know what? I just won't go work. I'll let my animals do the work. Okay, God, I won't work, but these servants are kind of belong to me, and they're not me, so maybe I'll send them out to work. God is making one thing perfectly clear to the people of Israel, and what he is making perfectly clear to them is there is no work to be done on the Sabbath. Now, this is a huge deal for slaves who have been slaves for 400 years. Multiple generations of there is no rest. And God is trying to give them a new rhythm, a rhythm of rest. Because what God knows is that when we have a rhythm of work that requires no rest, we have created a rhythm that requires no God. When we have a rhythm of work that requires no rest, we have no need for a God who offers rest. Somebody needs to hear that. I know I did. God is saying to his people, I need to be a part of your rhythm. I need there to be moments where it's not about you, it's about me. Because when we have a rhythm that requires no rest, we start to get a mindset that says, I work, I provide, and anything I need, I make it happen. I'm the one doing the work. I'm the one providing for my family. And if we need something, I'll work hard and get it. Now, all of those sound like great American qualities. There is nothing wrong with being a hardworking individual. But when we don't have a rhythm of rest, that's all we are, is a hardworking individual. And what I'm telling you is God is requiring something different of us. He doesn't want us to simply be hardworking individuals. He wants us to rely on him. He wants us to rely on him. And if we're the ones doing it all, we can live a life in rhythm that does not require him. So where does this idea of Sabbath come from? Now, if he's creating this rule in Exodus 20, that means that he's already had some explanation in their lives of what a Sabbath is earlier. So we're actually going to live today in Exodus 16. Okay? In Exodus 16, the people have left Egypt. They've been gone for about a month and a half, and they're out there in the desert as free people. All right? And in Exodus 16, verses 2 and 3, it says this: in the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. So just so we're clear, they've been freed from Egypt. They are no longer slaves. They've reached a big sea, and the soldiers are coming after them now. And Moses raises his staff, and the sea parts in two, and they get to the other side. And now on the other side, after they've seen God's work and God's desire to save them, they're now grumbling. I can't imagine someone seeing God move in their life and then grumbling later. Can you? I mean, imagine if we had stories about how God showed up for us and then we complained about him. We would never do that every day. So the people are grumbling against Moses and Aaron as men. You did this to us, right? They grumble against them. The Israelites said to them, check this out. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. If only we were still slaves. If only we hadn't seen the Red Sea part. If only we hadn't seen the Passover occur in Egypt. If only we hadn't seen God's hand through the plagues that came across the land. If only none of that had ever happened and we could just be slaves like we've been for 400 years. They go on to say, there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly to death. You did this to us, Moses and Aaron. You did this to us, God. You brought us out here and now we're uncomfortable. We'd be better off as slaves because at least while we were slaves, we were fed. I would rather be a happy, fed slave than be free. I'm telling you, this hits closer to home than you want to admit. And it hits closer to home than I want to admit. Where we get so comfortable in our own sinful state, in our own uncomfortableness, that it's easier to sit in our mess than it is to make changes that honor the Lord. I'd rather be a slave than be hungry and free. So if I were God, which is grateful for the Israelites, I'm not, I would have said, great, let's go back. You don't want to be grateful for what I've done for you? It's fine. I'll pick your ancestors up in another 400 years and we'll try again. I don't want to do this with ungrateful people. But God responds differently. It says in verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven. In the midst of their grumbling, in the midst of their disrespect, the Lord said, I will provide. And I am so grateful for a God who doesn't look at my actions and decide whether or not he will provide. Because I am not worthy. And the Israelites were not worthy of God's provision. And God wasn't just going to give them bread. There wasn't going to be a guy coming by in a wheelbarrow who was going to drop off a load of bread for them every day. He's going to rain down bread from heaven. You want to see who I am as your God? Watch this. And he didn't just rain down bread from heaven. The crazy part, and a little bit of the scary part, as far as I'm concerned as I read it, is at night he rained down quail from heaven. I can't imagine being an Israelite and just seeing a bunch of birds fall from the sky. That creeps me out a little bit, I'm not going to lie. But God provided meat in the evening, and he provided bread in the morning. He says, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they can at least follow my instructions. Imagine. I'm going to put bread down from heaven. I only want them to gather enough for that day. All right? Then I can test them. So it says, it continues on in verse 13 that evening quail came and covered the camp. So birds fell from the sky, right? And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. Something happened at night. There was a dew, and when the dew disappeared, there was bread from heaven. Okay? Now, as I read Scripture, when I read thin flakes like frost fell from the sky, I'm telling you that the dew, when it disappeared, all that was left was frosted flakes. All right? That's what Scripture says. That's not what I say. I'm just saying. It says frosted flakes. Okay? So the dew would disappear, and there would be flakes on the ground that looked like frost, and people would begin to gather them for the day. But when the Israelites saw it in verse 15, they said to each other, "What is it?" Well, if I was there, I would have told them. It's frosted flakes. But what is it? For they did not know what it was. So they began to call it manna. Okay? Now, here's what I need you to understand. In Hebrew, where it says, "What is it?" There's a Hebrew word for what is it. Like, we don't know what it is. What is it? The Hebrew word for what is it is manna. So they basically began to call it, we don't know what it is. Okay? So all throughout Scripture, when they talk about manna from the sky that fell for the Jewish people through the desert, basically they named this bread from heaven, we don't know what it is. Okay? They named it manna. And every day they were allowed to pick up an omer of manna, which is a measurement, it's about 3 pounds. So each person at night would get a bird, and during the day, they would get 3 pounds of manna. Now, I got to be honest with you. The people of Israel are kind of dumb, like us. So God says to them, gather enough just for the day, and I'll give you more tomorrow. So day one, they gather more than they need because they're freaking out because they're hungry. So they're gathering as much as they can, and then they go the next morning to go into the manna that they had gathered extra of, and as they open it, it's full of maggots. God said just enough for one day. God said just enough for one day, and they said, okay, we'll gather more. And then we get to day 6, and Moses gives them a different response. He said to them in Exodus 16:23, he said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be the Sabbath day. It's a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you bake, boil what you want to boil, save whatever is left, and keep it until morning." So, for 5 days a week, they would gather food in the morning, just enough for the day. On the 6th day, God allowed them to gather twice as much food so that on the 7th day, they could rest. Because it was to be a Sabbath unto the Lord. So what do you think those dumb people did? They woke up the next day on Sabbath, and they tried to gather food. Because they were unwilling to rest. And when they gathered it, it immediately had maggots and was unedible. But for a group of people who had been slaves for 400 years, the idea of rest did not make any sense to them. They tried to gather anyway. Moses goes on to try to explain the Sabbath some more and says to them in 29 and 30, "Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day you got bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out." So now the people rested. The Lord is trying to give a message to the people of Israel that I believe he's trying to give us in Sydney, Ohio, on a snowy day. I want you to depend on me. I want you to understand that you can rest and I'm still God. Well, Pastor Tim, I've just been bred to work. I'm a hard working man and my family needs me to work. I get it. In fact, God didn't give them just simply a day without work. The day before, they had to do twice the work. Did you catch that? So this wasn't about limiting the amount of work they did. This was about setting aside a day where you may have been bred to work, but you were created to rest. And you are better with rest than you are without it. And so am I. I want you to depend on me, and I will prove myself trustworthy. See, when we stop working, we realize that the world continues without our involvement. God is in control, not us. So, week 1, who do you worship? Commandment 2, how do you worship? The third commandment, do you know who I am? And the fourth, the Sabbath, do you trust me? Do you trust that if you stop for a day, I am God and I will provide? That's the question. So here's what I have for you. Will you take a Sabbath rest? Now let me be real honest. I have been told by the Father in heaven, I can remember at least 6 times over the last 10 years that I need a Sabbath, that I need to rest. And I have looked my Father in the eyes 5 of those 6 times and said no. You ever done that? You ever feel God's nudge and your answer is no? Pastor Tim said no to God. The same call 5 times. And every time the call was louder and stronger. And I said no. You want to know why? Because I'm busy. I got too much going on in my life. My job is stressful. I got kids who got practices all over the place. You know, when I'm not at work and I'm home, I feel guilty because all the things that need done around the house that I can't do because I'm gone, and it all falls on my wife. And for me to just rest is disrespectful to my family. So God, I'm not doing it. You can't make me. I will work, even if it turns to maggots. I will work because my family needs me to work. So, this is time number 6. And I have said yes. I sat down with my wife and I said, I'm tired of fighting God. And I know He's requiring rest in my life. I'm tired of putting everything that I want first. And I have no idea how we're going to do this. And I have no idea how often, because I'm not bound by the rules, okay? This isn't about following the rules. This is about, do you trust me, Tim? Do you trust me? So my family is going to figure out how to rest. And my family and my children are going to learn that rest is as important as work. And that means we got to do double the work in order to create space for rest. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you exactly what that looks like. We began this week with that. Because this isn't a sermon about me, it's a sermon about us. But I guess what I want you to hear this morning, and maybe for some of you, this is the 3rd or 4th time you said no to God on the issue of rest. Maybe for some of you, you didn't even know that God required rest of you. What I want you to hear is that even if it takes the rest of my life to figure it out, I'm going to continue to say yes to God because I know that when I stop, and when I stopped this week for a whole day, the world kept going. And everything was fine. And I see that God is in control, not me. And maybe for some of you, your schedule doesn't allow that on a weekly basis. Maybe it becomes once a month. Maybe for some of you, it's an extended Sabbath that lasts multiple days in a row because you take a vacation in order to have a Sabbath. I don't know what your life is like. I don't know how many jobs you have. I don't know how crazy your bills are. I don't know what's going on. And we all have our own story with work and with money and with our housing and all the other things in our life. But here's what I want you to know. If you're doing it, God is not in it. If in your mind you are the one who is making it all happen, then you are not placing your trust in your Father in heaven, who from the very beginning knew we would struggle with this. And I have to acknowledge that that is the way I've been living my life. God's not asking us to sit around for a whole day and watch TV and call it Sabbath. God is asking us to take time out of our life and remember that it's not about us, it's about Him. And He's asking us the question, do you trust me? So in order to figure that out, I started questioning myself, what is it that these Israelites did on the Sabbath? Like, think about it. They're in the middle of the desert. Their entire lives, all they've done has been slaves. Now God is giving them twice the food, and now He's saying rest. Like, what if their iPads were dead? I mean, the zoo was so far away. They couldn't even go on a trip. They did nothing besides consider their Father in heaven and take care and love each other. That's what Sabbath looks like. They participated in activities that required their attention to be on the Lord. So how do we do that in 2022? I don't know. I can tell you that there are some things that I see in Scripture that are defining how my family will Sabbath moving forward. And I want to share some of those with you so that you can start to see that it doesn't have to be this weird thing where somehow you're supposed to pray for 24 hours. Okay? So how do you do it? First, you have to prepare for it. You will not have a Sabbath in your life if you do not calendar it. You have to schedule it because it requires twice the work the day before. There's a reason why it was every 7 days and not just when the clouds were shaped different in the sky. It's because God needed them to prepare. We have to prepare to rest. We will not just rest. So it starts with preparation. Lord, I want to make sure you're in control of my life and not me. You know how hard it is for me to stop working. I'm going to calendar it, and we're going to rest. Okay? So here are the things that popped out to me that are defining our Sabbath at home. Maybe they're helpful to you. Number one, make your Sabbath money free. There are two things that take up a lot of our time. The first one is money. Okay? If I take my family to Applebee's, and then we go to a movie, and then maybe we go visit some friends, and we go to a water park, and we say, wasn't that an awesome Sabbath? No, that's called vacation. Okay? Sabbath is about rest. Money causes us not to rest. All right? So if you're not going to work, maybe throttling back on the finances a little bit that day helps you not be able to work. Make your Sabbath money free. That's the first thing that takes up a lot of our time. The second is this: avoid watching screens. You want to know how to kill a day? Online shopping and a movie marathon. Right? Binge watching Netflix will kill a day. You'll literally look at each other and go, did we just watch 7 episodes? Right? You've done it, right? What does it look like for your Sabbath day to look different than every other day? Not because you sat around all day and watched TV. but because the TV wasn't even on. For that day, we had music playing in the house, and my phone was as far away from me as I could put my phone. I cannot tell you how difficult that was. But it reminded me who's in control. So, make your Sabbath money free. Avoid watching screens. 3, I would encourage you to make prayer a part of that. Pray. Thank God for what he's doing in your life. Thank him for how he's working. Ask him, are there things you need from me, God, that I'm not hearing because of my busyness? 4, spend time with friends. Spend time with people you love, people who bring rest to you by being with them. We all have people who don't make us very restful in our lives. That's not a good Sabbath day friend, okay? The Sabbath is for people who, when they're in your life, it enriches your life. Spend time with friends. It's okay. 5, spend time in nature. You want to see God? Man, I tell you, the ocean, for me, when I look out at that water and it just doesn't end, I understand the vastness of God in a way that I don't understand it anywhere else. My wife loves the ocean, but if you put her in a forest and she can see the trees and hear the birds, she sees God. What are the things in nature? What can we be around that God has created that will remind us that he's in control and not us? Spend your time in nature. 6, reach out to those that are on your heart or on your mind. Be encouraging. It's okay on the Sabbath to do work for someone else. It's okay to have something in your home and to take it to another house and say, we wanted to give this to you. It's okay to call someone and say, I just felt like I needed to pray for you. It's not okay to spend 3 hours on the phone talking about everybody else in the church. But it is okay to call and pray for someone. Reach out. Do God's work on the Sabbath, not yours. And 7, relax. Y'all, I'm not asking you to create laws that your life will live around for the sake of law. What I'm saying is if we're already in relationship with the Father, maybe this is a piece of our journey we're missing. Maybe our world has taught us that rest is laziness. Maybe our world has taught us that if you're going to make anything of yourself, it's on your back to do it. And maybe in some of those messages, we've lost sight of a God who is in control. I'm not asking you to become a lazy church. I'm asking you to become an intentional church with how we spend our time and how we spend our time with God. Relax. It's not about rules. My kids, when we talked about this as a family, my kids started saying things, so when are we allowed to turn the TV back on? Or like, what if a friend were to call and there was an emergency? Or, what are the rules? What time do I actually have to go to bed? Right? All these things, because our natural tendency as humans is to find the rules. What if we allow the Holy Spirit who lives in us to define our Sabbath, and we simply said, God, I'm giving this day to you, and as awkward as I get, I know it's worth it. Because I'm telling you, based on what I experienced Friday, it's like detox to actually stop and not work. God, I'm willing to be uncomfortable, to experience a Sabbath rest that is holy and set apart for you, so that you know, and I know, that you are a trustworthy Father. With God, rules only come after relationship.